In the previous lesson, we explored the Nordcraft color picker. Now let's take a look at how we can use it to create beautiful gradients. Let's look at a gradient on an element that takes up the entirety of the viewport. Here I have an HTML main element. Its height is set to 100 VH, which means it takes up the full height of the viewport. And on the style panel, you'll see that I've defined a linear gradient. When you add a background using the style panel, you can choose to use a solid color, an image, or a gradient. Here I have gradient selected. CSS gradients can be linear, radial, or conic, and they are created using color stops, which determines where one color starts blending into the next along the gradient line. Here I've set up a linear gradient which goes from top to bottom with two color stops. The first color stop is at 0% and the second is at 100%, meaning the gradient will blend both colors across the entirety of the gradient. If I change the second color stop to 50%, the colors stop blending at 50% of the way along the gradient, and the rest of the gradient is taken up with the second color. You can add as many colors to a gradient as you need and adjust the stop percentages accordingly. And you can use the drag handles on the color strip at the top of the panel to adjust the color stops to get them just right. And you can click on the grid or select from the angle drop-down to change the direction of the gradient. Now, I really want to draw your attention to the color interpolation setting here, which is something that often gets overlooked when designing CSS gradients. The color interpolation method in CSS specifies the color space used for blending color values, allowing you to blend colors differently to create different types of gradients. The default value in a browser is sRGB, and there are a lot to choose from depending on the effect you want to achieve. Here is an example comparing 5 different color spaces: sRGB, LCH, OKLCH, OKLab, and HSL. Each of these blocks has the same gradient colors and color stops defined, but the color space makes a big difference to how the colors are blended and perceived by the human eye. So each time you create a gradient, try changing the color interpolation method, as you might be surprised how much that setting changes the overall vibe of your design. Now let's move on to some more advanced features of gradients. As well as smoothly blended gradients, you can also use gradients to create stripes or dotted patterns using what are known as hard stops. A hard stop is achieved by adding a different color at the same stop value as the previous color, which instructs the CSS not to blend the colors, but to stop and start the different colors at a specified percentage value along the gradient. By using hard stops with radial or conical gradients, you can create some really unique effects. Say you wanted to create a striped background of just 2 colors. You could use color stops just like in this example, but depending on the size of the stripes you wanted, the list of color stops could get quite long. Here I have a gradient containing 2 colors, using the hard stop technique from the previous example, which creates a solid black stripe and a solid white stripe. To repeat these stripes, open up the Advanced section, and here you'll see options to define the height and width of the gradient stops. You can also change the direction of the gradient, where you'll need to adjust the height and width properties of the repeat for the desired effect. Again, don't forget about the different types of gradients. Now, what if you wanted to turn your striped gradient into a diagonal striped gradient? You'd think it should be as simple as changing the angle of the gradient. But if we do that, you'll see it doesn't quite look how we expected, as the linear gradient has created little boxes, where the size of each box is what we specified in the Advanced section, and has changed the angle of the gradient inside those boxes only. To achieve a full diagonal striped gradient, you can use a repeating gradient. Now, repeating gradients are great for when you want to specify the exact stop of a color in pixel values. So here I've created a hard stop gradient where each stripe is 50 pixels. To make that repeat, turn on the repeat toggle and you'll see the gradient repeated as before, but without needing to configure the size of the stripes in the advanced panel. What's more, you can now play with the angle to create diagonal stripes that aren't confined to those little boxes. As ever, this lesson is only just scratching the surface of CSS gradients, and I would encourage you to experiment with the color picker and gradients to see what types of effects you can create, as the best way to learn is to play around and have fun.